It's like I'm just going to swap the displays. There we go. Okay. All right, this talk is titled Sharing a Sequencer is Caring About Interoperability. I am Ben Fisch. I am the CEO and co-founder of Espresso Systems. I am also an assistant professor of computer science at Yale. So, rollups are horizontally scaling Ethereum. Rollups are this beautiful solution that allows for sharding of computation across different applications. It allows for powerful servers to also help much weaker nodes verify what the state is, which allows for greater decentralization of Ethereum while supporting many, many more applications. It also enables virtual machine diversity. So you can add new applications that are not even running the EVM, and they can just simply prove their state transitions to the layer 1. So rollups are this wonderful innovation over the last few years that have brought tremendous benefits to the Ethereum ecosystem, scalability and virtual machine diversity in particular. But one of the things that rollups do today is they run what are called isolated sequencers. And this has a significant drawback. The drawback is that interoperability between applications across different rollups is very limited. Okay? Bridging is slow and costly, and this leads to a loss of what we call synchronous composability between applications and liquidity fragmentation. And the value of Ethereum is really in its unity, right? Not fragmentation. Seamless interoperability of applications is the promise of trust-minimized infrastructure and what really differentiates Web 3 from Web 2. So let's take a little look at what the job of the rollup sequencer is and why rollups are running isolated sequencers today that hampers interoperability. So the job of the sequencer is to collect transactions from users and periodically summarize the result of executing those transactions and post it to the Ethereum network. This, in a ZK rollup, would also come with an immediate validity proof, which allows the Ethereum network to verify that the state update is correct. So it determines rollup blocks and which transactions are included in those rollup blocks and their ordering. A sequencer may also run an auction. So it naturally gives rise to an auction where builders are bidding to propose the next block, and the sequencer kind of runs an auction among these builders, and that helps it produce the most valuable block it can, which is the same dynamic that happens with leaders or proposers in Ethereum's consensus protocol. Now, based sequencing, which is the most recent, let me just, Base sequencing, which is really the original version of rollups, is as follows. So L2 nodes just read the finalized transaction list from the L1. There's no sequencer, there's no additional sequencer. They just read, the users send their transactions directly to the rollup smart contract. And L2 nodes read the finalized transaction list from the L1, they execute them, and then periodically post what the state transition is, along with perhaps a ZK proof to the layer 1. So by using the layer 1 itself as the sequencer, the advantage is, one, it inherits the decentralization and liveness and censorship resistance of the layer 1. You're not introducing this external party. And number two, because all these rollups are then sharing the same sequencer in effect, it results in improved interoperability, not only between rollups, but also between rollups and layer 1 applications. And I'll get into in a little bit more detail why that is the case. But before, why is this important? Well, ultimately, users just want a secure, convenient, and low-cost experience, right? They don't want to think about necessarily being on one rollup versus another. Satisfying user intents will be most efficient across applications that are deployed to rollups with the greatest unity, and not only with each other, but also with smart contracts on the Ethereum L1. So that's why this is so important. Now, so what is enabled by having a common sequencer between not only rollups but also the layer 1? What is the benefit of this? Well, the way the layer 1 works is that it always has a proposer that's building the next block, right? It has proposers, and then it has validators, which are attesting and signing on the block proposal and making sure that the network has received it and doesn't forget it. So this elected proposer from the L1, if it's also producing blocks for rollups, then what it can do is it can promise to users things that it will do synchronously between different rollups and maybe even the L1 itself. So here's a simple example. A rollup user wants to take advantage of some arbitrage between two AMMs on different rollups. So it says, I want my two transactions on rollups A and B to execute atomically. Now, the L1 proposer can give this promise to the user that it will execute its transactions on both rollup A and rollup B, or otherwise not included in the L1 block. Now, this doesn't give the user the same exact protection it has when just atomically taking advantage between arbitrage of two AMMs that are on the Ethereum L1 itself, or on the same rollup VM itself, but it's still quite powerful because the promise that the L1 proposer gives is slashable. Right? Violating a promise is a slashable offense, and even the user could collect damages. So promises function almost like an insurance policy. And importantly, the honest proposer can make these promises without any risk, so it can offer very low-cost insurance. There's much higher risk without a shared proposer. You can imagine that a builder would try to make the same promise to a user interacting with two different siloed rollup sequencers, but rollup A sequencer or proposer might accept its transaction while the rollup B proposer rejects it. So there's no real way for this external builder to make this promise unless there is a coordination. So proposer promises, or what are also known as preconfirmations, they enable a shared proposer for a bundle of multiple rollups to do many things, including acting as a liquidity provider, making promises to satisfy arbitrary user intents, atomic execution of several transactions across different rollups. They can also provide very fast confirmations of what it has proposed, even with 100 milliseconds latency or less, even though it takes much longer for Ethereum to finalize what happened. There is some risk that this pre-confirmation will eventually be reversed, but again, it can act as like an insurance policy that the proposer gives to a user, which can be checked in very, very short time. It can also be used a shared proposer can also be used to coordinate message passing between ZK provable chains. So this is something that Polygon AgLayer describes. And with improvements in the latency of proving, which may ultimately enable us to do real-time proving, even 100 millisecond latency proving, then this could ultimately enable synchronous interactions between L1 and L2 contracts. So again, violating a promise is a slashable offense, and if users can collect damages for violations of these promises, then pre-confirmations act as a form of insurance. There's many examples of cross-domain user intents that we might want to use pre-confirmations to satisfy. Some examples are capturing arbitrage, as I already gave an example of. Maybe finding the cheapest way to execute an asset swap, and that may involve multiple DeFi exchanges or liquidity providers across multiple chains. Or buying an NFT on one chain with funds from another, but not wanting to first bridge and swap assets unless you know that the purchase will actually succeed in the end. So this sounds all great, but what is base sequencing missing, right? Why were external sequencers introduced in the first place? Well, number one, better data compression, which ultimately translates to lower data availability costs. So an external sequencer collects transactions over time and can optimize when it posts them to the Ethereum L1. And also fast, what I'll emphasize is low-risk pre-confirmations. Okay? What we just talked about before with L1 proposers giving promises over what might happen, there's always the risk that even if they do nothing wrong, their promise will be violated. Because Ethereum could experience a reorg, and transactions that they included could be dropped before 15 minutes have elapsed. Okay, ultimately, higher risk means that if they're going to give insurance to users, it's going to be higher cost. An external sequencer can pre-confirm pure L2 transactions that do not depend on any unfinalized L1 transactions with virtually no risk at all of being wrong because they have complete autonomy of what they're going to do with the rollup contract. Right? They have an exclusive right to update the L2 state. So better data compression and fast, low-risk pre-confirmations were the real reason why external sequencers were introduced in the first place. The original Arbitrum paper actually had no external sequencer. These were introduced later. Now, is there a middle ground? Yes. Base sequencing can have its cake and eat it too, in some sense too. What we can do is we can introduce an external finality gadget. Yeah, we call this a fast finality gadget, and we could have L1 validators even opt in to participate, say using eigenlayer restaking, as Kaida was just talking about in the last talk. So what does this do? Well, the rollup smart contract on the L1 will require, transactions to be first approved by the fast finality gadget. So users are sending their transactions still to an L1 proposer. The L1 proposer produces a super block for all these rollups, but it needs to get it approved by the fast finality gadget first, right? And then it will be settled on the L1. And so the rollup smart contract requires this fast finality gadget, which could be a BFT consensus protocol operated by an opt-in set of validators to approve all transactions. And this still maintains L1 composability because the L1 proposer is still proposing. It's still building the L1 and L2 blocks together, but it first needs notarization from this fast finality gadget. What we can achieve here is something what we call conditional finality. The finality of any L2 transaction is now conditioned on the finality of the most recent L1 block that it depends on, and of course the security of the fast finality gadget. So this inherits the benefits, the composability of base sequencing, but retains also the benefits of external sequencers that were introduced by rollups. Now, what else is base sequencing missing? Especially now that we're used to rollup sequencers. Well, MEV capture for rollups. So enshrined rollup sequencers have additional revenue beyond the gas fees in rollups, which come from tips that users are paying for satisfaction of intents, whether they're pre-confirmation tips, which generalize order priority fees or standard order priority fees. So vanilla base sequencing is simply not economically aligned with rollups. And so a solution is to have a mechanism to redistribute sequencing MEV that flows to the Ethereum L1 or whatever is doing this shared sequencing back to rollups. So we can view shared sequencing as an auction. It gives rise to this auction where proposers are bidding on rollup block bundles. We can auction off the right to update all rollups or a subset of rollups at once to bidders. Proposers are competing with each other and bidding on the right to produce this super block. Okay? So the difference between shared sequencing and isolated sequencing is the difference between a shared auction versus isolated auctions. Right? In the picture today, every rollup sequencer essentially auctions off the right on its own to produce the next block on that rollup. Whereas with something like shared sequencing or base sequencing, we have a joint auction where the rollup block spaces are auctioned off all together, and someone can bid on the right to produce a bundle of all rollups together. Now, the shared auction revenue may be higher than the combined isolated auctions, but how should we share the auction revenue with individual rollups? Is there a stable mechanism through which rollups can dynamically participate in this mechanism such that they're always convinced they're better off running in the joint auction than in isolation? There's many analogies to this. We can look at bands playing at a music festival, right? The festival sells tickets. How is the ticket revenue allocated among the bands? Travel agencies sell tickets combining flight legs from multiple airlines. How should the ticket revenue be allocated among airlines? A toy example is, let's say you have two companies, one that manufactures left shoes, one that manufactures right shoes. It's obviously better to sell the shoes as a pair in a store, but then how would you split the revenue between the two different companies so that they're convinced they wouldn't be better off selling left shoes and right shoes on their own? So a solution is what's called a combinatorial auction, where proposers can bid on any combination of roll-up bundles that they want to produce, and each bid is for the right to propose this bundle of blocks in a specific slot. Now for each slot, we would select a partition of roll-ups into bundles that maximizes auction revenue, and this can result in even multiple proposers. Right? It wouldn't necessarily be one proposer for all roll-ups all the time. And every roll-up receives at least its highest bid. In fact, every roll-up can even bid on itself, which functions as what's called a reserve price. A reserve price is the minimum price at which a seller is willing to sell a product. So if a roll-up bids high on itself, then it can ensure that it will at least make as much as it would make running on its own in isolation. If it bids too high, it will be excluded from bundles that are assigned to shared proposers. Now, burning part of this bid can also further disincentivize what's called shill bidding, where they're bidding too high, and that's reducing the efficiency of the overall allocation. And this is similar to what's called a harbinger tax. But wait, how is this base sequencing? Right, I said that base sequencing gives the right to the L1 proposer to produce the next block, not only for the L1, but for all rollups. So where does this auction come in, right? What the hell is this auction? What about the L1 proposer? Well, this can also be a version of base sequencing. Okay, so this is what I call base sequencing 3.0. So after running the combinatorial auction, which anyone can participate in, the L1 proposer for the Ethereum L1 block in the same slot can be given the option to purchase the proposal rights for any bundle it wants at the winning bid price, plus perhaps a premium because it can produce even more value since it's also producing the L1 block together. This price at which it pays for the bundle will always exceed the sum of reserve prices for rollups within that bundle by design. So what is shared-based sequencing, after all, in light of this picture here? Well, it is a marketplace. It is a marketplace through which rollups can sell block space to shared proposers who create surplus value by satisfying user intents across multiple chains. And for base rollups, that includes the Ethereum L1 chain itself. So thank you. We are Espresso Systems. We are building a shared sequencer, and a shared sequencer that also supports base rollups too. So please follow us on Twitter. We are at Espresso Sys. My Twitter handle is at Fisch. And stay tuned for updates. We have a new testnet coming out soon called Cappuccino.